Snow whipped through the night like 1,000 tiny blades, slicing the silence of a lonely highway. A mangled police cruiser sat half-buried in white, its windshield shattered, its sirens still faintly blinking red and blue against the storm. Inside, a young woman in uniform bled onto the seat, unconscious. That was the moment Ethan, a single father just trying to make it home, slammed on his brakes. His loyal German shepherd growled at the shadows. What Ethan did next would not only save her life, it would pull him into a secret far darker than he ever imagined. Ethan Miller lived in a quiet corner of upstate New York, where the winters seemed to stretch longer than anywhere else. His small house stood on a lonely road, its white paint fading, its porch creaking with every step. Inside those walls, laughter and sorrow both had lived, but lately it was only his daughter's voice that kept the place warm. Ethan wasn't rich, wasn't famous, but to the only person who mattered, he was everything. Every morning began the same way, the smell of black coffee, the scrape of toast, the sound of little feet rushing through the hallway. Lily, his 9-year-old daughter, always appeared with messy braids and a backpack almost bigger than her. Ethan would kneel, fix her hair with clumsy but loving hands, and tuck an extra snack into her lunchbox. "You'll need it," he'd whisper, smiling at the thought of her grin when she found it later at school. Life had been cruel to Ethan. 3 years ago, cancer stole away the woman he had promised forever to. He had held her hand until the very last breath, and in that moment, a part of him broke that would never fully heal. But when he looked into Lily's tear-stained face, he knew he had no choice but to stand, to carry both of them forward. Since then, every choice, every sacrifice, every long night of work had been for her. The townsfolk knew Ethan as the quiet man who always kept his head down. Some admired his strength, others pitied the loneliness etched into his tired eyes. But Ethan never asked for pity. He only asked for enough strength to get through one more day. He carried himself with the quiet discipline of a man who had seen harder battles, both in war and in life. And though he rarely spoke of his past, it lived in the sharpness of his gaze. His only companion outside of Lily was Duke, a German shepherd with the loyalty of a soldier and the heart of a protector. Duke had trained with Ethan during his military years, and the bond between them ran deeper than words. The dog never left his side, guarding Lily as if she were his own. To Ethan, Duke was more than a pet, he was family, and sometimes the only one who seemed to understand the weight he carried. Despite the struggles, there were moments of light. Saturday mornings filled with pancake batter on the counter, Sunday walks by the frozen lake with Lily riding on Duke's back, evenings of popcorn and superhero movies where Lily always leaned against him and whispered, "You're my real superhero, Daddy." Those words healed him more than anything else. They reminded him why he had to keep going, even when the nights felt unbearably long. That December had been especially brutal. Snowstorms came without mercy, burying roads, freezing pipes, and making work harder to find. Ethan stretched every dollar, patching the furnace, skipping meals so Lily never had to. He never complained. That was the life he chose, the life of a father who put his child's happiness above his own. If the world weighed heavy, he carried it so Lily wouldn't have to. But fate has a way of finding men like Ethan, men who believe their lives will be lived quietly, unseen. On one fateful night, as snow fell heavier than ever and the road stretched lonely before him, Ethan had no idea his world was about to collide with something far greater. A night where his choices would echo beyond his small home, beyond his town, changing not only his life, but the lives of everyone around him. The snowstorm raged that night, swallowing the road in a curtain of white. Ethan gripped the wheel tighter, his knuckles pale, as the heater struggled to keep up with the cold. Duke sat in the passenger seat, ears perked, growling at every shadow. The world outside was silence and ice until something flickered in the headlights. Ethan slowed, his gut telling him this was no ordinary sight. Ahead, a police cruiser lay crumpled in a ditch, half buried in snow. Its windshield was spiderwebbed, the hood smoking faintly, and the faint red-blue of the siren blinked like a dying heartbeat. Ethan's chest tightened. He had seen wrecks before, but this was different. The road around it was littered with shattered glass and the whisper of violence. Duke barked sharply, sensing danger. Ethan pulled over, his boots sinking deep into the snow as he stepped out. The cold bit through his jacket instantly, but adrenaline burned hotter. He moved fast, scanning for survivors. When he yanked open the door, his breath caught in his throat. Slumped over the steering wheel was a young woman in uniform, blood dripping down her temple. She was barely breathing. Her badge gleamed faintly in the storm's glow. Officer Sarah Blake. Ethan felt the world slow around him. He pressed 2 fingers against her neck, pulse weak, fading. "Don't you quit on me," he muttered. With steady hands, he tilted her airway, tore a strip from his shirt, and pressed it against her wound. Every movement brought back muscle memory from a past life he thought he'd left behind. Duke circled the wreck, growling into the darkness. Ethan felt the hairs on the back of his neck rise. This wasn't just an accident. There were bullet holes punched into the door, the kind he knew all too well. "Someone did this," Ethan whispered under his breath. The thought chilled him deeper than the storm ever could. Grunting, Ethan pulled Sarah free from the car, slinging her arm around his shoulder. She groaned, half-conscious, lips moving in broken fragments. He bent close, catching only 2 words. "The file," before she slipped back into unconsciousness. Ethan froze, staring into the night as though it might answer. What file? What was she carrying that was worth dying for? A crack split the silence. A gunshot. Snow puffed up near his boots. Ethan's instincts took over. He ducked, dragging Sarah toward his truck, his heart pounding like war drums. Duke barked wildly, snarling into the dark, his body braced to attack. Somewhere out there, unseen eyes were watching them. With a final push, Ethan shoved Sarah into the truck's backseat and slammed the door. His breath fogged the glass as he gripped the wheel, tires spinning before they caught traction. He didn't look back, didn't dare. Whoever had started this fight wasn't finished, and Ethan knew it. But one thing was clear. He had just stepped into a battle he never asked for. Back at his modest home, Ethan laid Sarah on the worn couch, wrapping her in blankets. The old clock ticked loudly, each second reminding him of how fragile her breath sounded. Duke stationed himself at the door, muscles tense, eyes sharp, as if he knew their safe haven had just become a target. The air inside the house felt heavier, charged with a tension Ethan couldn't shake. Ethan cleaned her wounds as best as he could with the limited supplies in his first aid kit. His hands were steady, guided by memories from war zones long past. But his mind raced with questions. Who shot her? Why was she out there alone? And most of all, what was this file she whispered about? He felt like he had stumbled into someone else's war. Hours crawled by before Sarah stirred again, her eyes fluttering open. Ethan leaned close, speaking softly. "You're safe. I got you out of there." She tried to sit, but the pain in her body forced her back down with a wince. "Don't trust them," she whispered, her voice hoarse. Ethan frowned. Who? Her eyes darted, filled with fear, before she slipped back into uneasy sleep. The phone rang suddenly, its shrill tone cutting through the silence. Ethan froze. No one called him this late. The number was blocked, glowing on the screen like a warning. He let it ring, his jaw tightening. He knew enough to trust his gut, and his gut told him this wasn't just coincidence. Outside, Duke growled low, staring through the frosted window as headlights swept past the house. Later that night, Ethan peeked through the curtains, his breath catching. A black SUV slowed near his driveway, its tinted windows reflecting only darkness. For a long moment, it lingered, engine humming like a threat, before finally rolling on. Ethan's chest tightened. Whoever they weren't finished. He knew that kind of patience, the patience of hunters. By morning, Sarah was awake enough to speak, though every word seemed to cost her strength. She looked him in the eye, her face pale but determined. "They'll come back," she said. "They won't stop until I'm dead." Ethan rubbed his face with one hand, torn between anger and fear. He wanted to keep Lily safe. He wanted no part of this. But it was already too late. He tried to convince himself it wasn't his fight. He was just a single dad, not a cop, not a soldier anymore. His only duty was to Lily. Yet when he looked at Sarah, broken, hunted, betrayed, he couldn't turn away. He knew what it was to be left behind, to be abandoned when the world turned dark. He couldn't do that to her, not and still call himself a father. That night, as he tucked Lily into bed, she asked softly, "Daddy, who's that lady?" Ethan kissed her forehead, forcing a smile. "Someone who needs our help." Lily hugged him tight, whispering, "Then we'll help her. That's what heroes do." Ethan sat in the dark long after she slept, staring at the rifle leaning against the wall, knowing tomorrow would bring a storm bigger than the snow outside. The storm outside had quieted by morning, but inside Ethan's home, the air was still thick with tension. Sarah sat propped on the couch, her uniform torn, eyes restless. Ethan brought her a mug of warm tea, but she barely touched it. "You need to tell me what's going on," he said firmly, his voice carrying the tone of a soldier who wanted answers. She hesitated, then drew in a shaky breath. "There's a file," Sarah whispered, her gaze fixed on the floor. "Evidence, names, accounts, everything tied to a cartel that's been bleeding this town dry. But someone inside the force, they're with them. They knew I had it. That's why they tried to kill me." Her words hung in the air like a knife. Ethan felt his chest tighten. He had suspected something dark, but betrayal within the badge cut deeper than he expected. Ethan paced the room, his boots echoing against the wood floor. He had seen corruption before, overseas and at home, but hearing it now felt different. This wasn't just politics. This was about his town, his daughter, his neighbors. "So you're saying someone wearing the same uniform that little kids salute at parades is selling us out to criminals?" he asked. Sarah nodded, tears threatening to spill. Lily wandered in, rubbing her eyes, still in her pajamas. "Daddy, are you mad?" she asked innocently. Ethan crouched down, pulling her close. "Not at you, sweetheart. Go upstairs and play, okay?" As she ran off, Sarah's eyes softened. "She's your world, isn't she?" Ethan swallowed hard. "She's all I've got." For the first time, Sarah saw not just a rescuer, but a man carrying the weight of fatherhood alone. That night, Sarah spread out a small map on Ethan's kitchen table. "They'll search everywhere. If I can get this drive to the right people, we can stop them. But until then, they'll keep coming." She slid a tiny flash drive across the table. Ethan picked it up, its cold plastic feeling heavier than steel. He realized in that moment he wasn't just sheltering her, he was holding something men would kill for. Duke barked suddenly, ears twitching toward the window. Ethan pulled the curtain aside, his breath fogging the glass. A car was idling down the road again, headlights off, engine humming. "They're watching us," Ethan muttered. Sarah's face drained of color. He gripped the rifle tighter, a promise forming in his mind. No one would touch his daughter, no matter the cost. Sarah touched his arm gently, her voice breaking. "You could walk away. Pretend you never saw me, never saved me. You and your girl could stay safe." Ethan stared at her, the memory of his wife's last words echoing in his chest. Protect her, no matter what. He shook his head slowly. "I'm not the kind of man who walks away." His words carried the finality of a vow. And so the line was drawn. Ethan wasn't just a single dad anymore. He had become part of Sarah's fight, part of something bigger than himself. He didn't know yet how far the storm would reach, but deep down, he felt the shift. This was no longer just survival. It was about justice, and about a father proving to his daughter that doing the right thing always came with a cost worth paying. The night they came, the wind howled like a warning. Ethan woke to Duke's furious barking, claws scraping the floor as the dog threw himself toward the door. Lights cut across the living room window, SUVs, dark and menacing, sliding silently onto his land. Ethan's pulse quickened. He grabbed the rifle, his hands steady but his heart pounding like war drums. The fight had arrived at his doorstep. Sarah stumbled into the room, clutching her side, pale but alert. "It's them," she gasped. Ethan nodded, already locking the door and shoving Lily into the back room. "Stay with Duke. Don't come out until I say." Lily's eyes welled with fear, but she clung to Duke's fur, whispering, "Be brave, boy." The dog growled low, ready for battle. Ethan kissed her forehead before stepping into the storm. The first window shattered, glass spraying across the floor. Bullets tore into the walls, wood splintering around him. Ethan dropped behind the couch, firing back with sharp precision. Years of training roared back to life as if they'd never left. He wasn't just a father now, he was a soldier again. Every shot he fired wasn't for himself, it was for the little girl hiding in the next room. Sarah crawled toward the table, her hand clutching the flash drive. "If I don't make it," she started, but Ethan cut her off. "You will." He grabbed the drive and shoved it into his pocket, determination burning in his eyes. He wouldn't let this be for nothing. Not tonight. Not ever. Outside, voices shouted orders, boots crunching in the snow as more men closed in. The back door burst open with a crash. One intruder lunged inside, only to be met with Duke's fury. The dog launched, teeth sinking deep, dragging the man down in screams. "Good boy," Ethan shouted, firing at another shadow that appeared in the doorway. Smoke filled the house, mingling with the sharp smell of gunpowder and the freezing wind that tore through broken windows. For a terrifying moment, Ethan thought they'd be overwhelmed. The gunfire was relentless, the shadows endless. But then, sirens. Real ones this time. Flashing blue and red lights cut through the snow, scattering across the walls. The attackers hesitated, retreating into the storm, dragging their wounded with them. Ethan slumped against the wall, chest heaving, rifle smoking. Sarah leaned against him, her face streaked with blood and sweat. You saved us," she whispered. Ethan shook his head. "No, we saved each other." Duke patted back, muzzle bloody but eyes bright, tail wagging faintly. Lily peeked out from the back room, her tiny voice trembling. "Daddy?" Ethan pulled her into his arms, relief flooding his soul. When the police stormed inside, guns raised, they froze at the sight before them. A single father, a wounded officer, and a loyal dog standing amid broken glass and spent shells. Ethan lowered his rifle slowly, eyes hard. For a moment, no one spoke. Then the chief himself stepped forward, his voice hushed. "What you did tonight, it just saved the entire department." But for Ethan, the only victory was holding Lily close and knowing she was safe. The night finally gave way to dawn, and the snow outside lay scattered with tire tracks and broken glass. Inside Ethan's battered home, silence lingered, broken only by Lily's soft breathing as she clung to his side. Sarah sat nearby, her arm bandaged, exhaustion in her eyes, but a flicker of relief too. They had survived, but Ethan knew survival was only the beginning. Hours later, the police chief himself returned, flanked by officers who had not turned corrupt. His weathered face softened as he looked at Sarah, alive, and Ethan standing guard beside her. "We owe you more than words," the chief said solemnly. "That file she carried, it's going to tear apart a network that's poisoned this town for years." Ethan only nodded, his gaze drifting to Lily, the only thanks he needed. In the days that followed, Sarah was taken to a secure location, her injuries treated, her testimony prepared. The news spread quickly, cartel leaders arrested, dirty cops exposed, the kind of justice people thought would never come. But in the whispers and newspaper headlines, one name was repeated with reverence: Ethan Miller, the quiet, single dad who risked everything. Neighbors stopped by with casseroles, children whispered about him like he was a character from their favorite movies, and Lily beamed every time someone called her dad a hero. But Ethan never boasted, never accepted praise with more than a quiet, "Thank you." He hadn't fought for medals. He had fought to keep his daughter safe and to help a woman who had no one else to turn to. Sarah came back once more, weeks later, stronger now, her uniform crisp again. She stood on Ethan's porch, eyes shimmering with gratitude. "You didn't just save me," she said softly. "You saved everything I was fighting for." Ethan smiled faintly, scratching Duke's ears. "We just did what had to be done." Their handshake lingered, an unspoken bond forged in fire and blood. That evening, Ethan tucked Lily into bed, the warmth of their home restored after weeks of chaos. She looked up at him, eyes wide and trusting. "Daddy, are the bad guys gone?" He kissed her forehead and whispered, "For now, sweetheart, and as long as I'm here, you'll always be safe." In her small world, that promise was stronger than any army. For the first time in years, Ethan allowed himself a breath of peace. The weight on his shoulders had shifted, not vanished, but lighter somehow. He knew shadows would always exist, but so would people willing to fight against them. And he had shown his daughter that courage wasn't about never being afraid. It was about standing tall even when fear tried to break you. As the night settled, Duke curled at his feet, Lily dreaming in the next room. Ethan sat quietly by the fire. He realized that though fate had dragged him into a storm he never asked for, it had also reminded him of who he was. Not just a father, not just a survivor, but a man who still had something to give this world. The weeks turned into months, and the town slowly returned to its ordinary rhythm. But for those who knew the story, nothing felt quite the same. At the diner, at the gas station, at Lily's school, people spoke Ethan's name with a new kind of respect. Not as a soldier, not as a broken widower, but as the father who became a hero when no one else would. Sarah visited often, sometimes in uniform, sometimes just as a friend. She and Ethan never spoke much about the night of the attack, but the silence between them was filled with understanding. They had walked through fire together, and though their paths were different, the bond remained unshakable. Lily adored her, calling her Aunt Sarah, and Duke greeted her with a wagging tail every time. Ethan never let the praise change him. He still packed Lily's lunches, still worked odd jobs, still fixed the leaky roof with his own 2 hands. But something in his eyes had shifted. Lighter, stronger, like a man who had remembered his purpose. He no longer saw himself as just surviving. He was living again, step by step, breath by breath. The town honored him with a small ceremony, presenting him with a medal he tucked away in a drawer. But when Lily asked to see it, he placed it gently in her hands. "This belongs to you too," he said, "because you're the reason I fight." She hugged him so tightly that he thought his heart might burst. In her eyes, he saw his wife's reflection, smiling from somewhere far beyond. The story of Ethan's courage spread farther than he ever expected. Some called him a hero, others called him lucky. But he knew the truth. He was simply a man who refused to stand by while others suffered. That was the legacy he wanted Lily to carry. That doing the right thing often cost the most, but it was worth every price. As spring arrived, Ethan sat on the porch with Sarah and Lily, the setting sun painting the sky in gold. Sarah leaned back, whispering, "Fate has a funny way of finding us, doesn't it?" Ethan nodded slowly, watching Lily chase Duke across the yard. Sometimes what feels like an accident is really just destiny's hand. His voice carried the calm of a man who had finally made peace with his path. In the end, the cartel fell, The corrupt were punished, and the town breathed easier. But for Ethan, the true victory wasn't in headlines or arrests. It was in the quiet moments. Pancakes on Saturday mornings. Lily's laughter echoing through their home. The loyal shadow of Duke beside him. The simple gift of an ordinary life, hard-earned and deeply treasured. So, if you take anything from Ethan's story, let it be this. Heroes aren't just in uniforms or capes. Sometimes they're single dads making impossible choices. Sometimes they're dogs who refuse to back down. And sometimes they're children whose love keeps hope alive. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe for more inspiring stories like this. Because every heart carries a story worth telling.